I want to start today talking about the incredible things we're watching in America related to the coronavirus, the holding back by the government of information related to hydroxychloroquine. In fact, the suppression by the government of the idea that hydroxychloroquine is effective in treating COVID-19. So I want to start by just showing you a chart and ask Matt the one if I sent him a chart related to the death rate in countries. And I just want you to hold that chart right there, Matt. I want you to just look at this and recognize the point this thing is making. In countries, by the way, hydroxychloroquine has been used for, I've learned facts recently on this topic, for about 75 years. It is effective and has been proven effective for decades to treat all sorts of diseases such as lupus, malaria, and other autoimmune diseases. It has no known side effects, which is one of the reasons it is so popular with doctors. It's also inexpensive because the patent has lapsed. So you would think that in a sane world, this would make the entire country, our country, very excited about the idea of making hydroxychloroquine available for use when we're dealing with the coronavirus. But what the chart you're looking at is showing you is that in countries, and by the way, hydroxychloroquine has not been sold over the counter in America, but it has in other countries, available as an over-the-counter medication, meaning just you don't need a prescription, just like you go in the grocery store. You can go into stores in countries around the world and you can buy hydroxychloroquine. With that chart, Matt, I'm sorry, I do want that chart up one more time just to show you what I'm talking about. What this chart is showing you is the difference in the fatality rate. How many people died of COVID-19 in countries where you had hydroxychloroquine available over the counter and where many people took it early on. People took this medication early on onset of the symptoms, and sometimes even as a prophylactic, meaning people took hydroxychloroquine to avoid developing COVID-19. The countries in blue with you can see right there, the countries in blue, Costa Rica, a bunch of other countries you're seeing listed, all those blue lines, those are indicating countries having a lower fatality rate due to COVID-19 because of the availability of hydroxychloroquine. Those countries include Israel, South Africa, Chile, Turkey, India, Russia. Countries in red have a much higher fatality rate. More people die of COVID-19 in countries where hydroxychloroquine is not available, where it's been banned or discouraged. And I just want you to think about, this is not one doctor's one-off anecdotal story. This is not just one allegedly, potentially ill-informed American. This is data. Now, I want to come back and talk to you about why that matters so much in America. So you've had doctors talking. Okay, we can thank you for that chart. That chart is, you got to take a screen grab of that chart, folks, and share it with your friends. So in America, we have had the willingness of some doctors to speak up. We've had them on my show. We had Dr. Robin Armstrong from Houston. We had Dr. Yvette Lozano from here in Dallas area. Doctors around the country saying, look, this great hydroxychloroquine is working in actually relieving the symptoms of COVID-19, actually allowing people to, as a very effective treatment to get past the danger of COVID-19. But we've had suppression at an almost impossible to comprehend level, and many doctors in this country trying to talk more and more about how could this be? Why would this be happening? Well, one thing that's happened along these lines is that a medical organization, a top medical organization in America, named the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, AAPS, has actually filed a lawsuit trying to get the HHS, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the FDA and the CDC, essentially trying to force them to release the hydroxychloroquine they are holding back from availability to America in the millions of doses our government has and is holding back. And you're likely aware that Dr. Fauci, who unfortunately still seems to hold the predominant decision maker role in the medical community in America, and on behalf of the medical community of America, seems to hold the decisive role. And he continues to discourage, kind of roll his eyes, wrinkle his nose, act doubtful, in every way depress the idea that hydroxychloroquine is a successful treatment. There have also been studies showing that hydroxychloroquine is effective, not just one random study in some backwoods area, but serious studies up to now, 51 studies around the world showing hydroxychloroquine is effective in treating COVID-19. I am not here to give medical advice. I am a lawyer by background. I'm a talk show host. I'm a conservative advocate, but my conservative advocacy drives me to want to talk about this with you and to urge you to think about why in the world, why in America, where the data you just saw from around the world, countries that made hydroxychloroquine available early on, and many countries over the counter have a far lower death rate from COVID due to COVID-19 than countries like America and other countries where COVID-19 is either withheld, discouraged, or banned. In what other arena of medicine would we be saying, oh, better hold back? This thing seems to be working, so let's not make it available. Let's hold it back. So you had a lawsuit filed, again, by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. And they're basically, in addition to filing a lawsuit saying, come on, federal government, release what you have, make it available in America. They're also, this same organization is submitting studies to the government. So the government can't say, hey, well, we didn't know. Who knew that there was we had such a great and effective treatment available. So they are talking about, this group is actually using language like the perfect storm of politics in a presidential election year. And we're going to get around to this in a moment, how this ties to the presidential election, how it ties to the push for mail-in ballots, how it ties to the president's fabulous booming economy being essentially decimated by COVID-19 and by the slow recovery of COVID-19. So, and also being sent in by this group who are suing the federal government, are saying, what in the world is the idea of all these studies that are being essentially suppressed? Why is it that those studies aren't more widely available? Why in the world is it these studies aren't more available so people understand there is actual success? 51 global studies finding HCQ effective in treating COVID-19. I also want to mention to you that there are other studies that we've talked about in the show before, with other studies that people like Dr. Fauci and others might refer to and say, well, look at this study. They didn't have such great results. Two things to know about those things, again, pointed out by this organization. One is that in many of those studies, they wait to make hydroxychloroquine available as a treatment to patients who are already at the severe stages of COVID-19. They aren't using it at the early onset phase that they should be, but instead are using it when they are very, very late in their development of the disease, very seriously ill, and it's not as effective then as it is if it's used at the outset. The second point made in many of these articles I've been reading is the idea that some of the studies, because there were studies that say it's not effective or not necessarily that effective or may have harmful side effects. The harmful side effect studies that people point to and say, well, this is why the government's holding it back, because look at all these studies saying harmful side effects. Understand what they're doing in those studies, and at least some of them, and I think many of them, they're sabotaging hydroxychloroquine by administering it not just late in the development of the disease, but also in highly excessive amounts, in amounts that would not normally be prescribed. So yeah, you give someone a lot of anything, it's not going to be as good as giving them only the amount they need. So they have those studies where they're saying side effects seem to be some heart attack or side effects in other ways. It's because in at least many of those studies, they're giving patients an excessive amount, unnecessarily excessive amount of hydroxychloroquine. And all this, I'm talking to you about this. I know other talk show hosts are talking to you. Doctors are coming out about this in this country and trying to say, hey, I'm finding great success using hydroxychloroquine. What is the reason the government is pushing back so hard against it? Well, now I want to ask Matt the Wonderful, and wrapping up the first five today, to play a clip. This is Bill Gates, and you all know who Bill Gates is. He's a billionaire, and he is someone who's been very active, really, for decades in efforts to eradicate diseases his causes have done many good things. He has given money to causes, or he's created foundations all over the world, including very determined to try to root out these debilitating diseases that are rampant in lower income countries and poorer countries. He's tried very hard to bring a better life. So you can say, well, he's done a great thing. He's trying to bring people out of poverty, people out of suffering. So Gates, has been expanding what he's been doing in terms of trying to bring people, help people in impoverished countries. And he's become an extreme advocate for vaccines. As we talked about in the show before, he's an advocate for vaccines as the solution for a wide array of diseases around this world. And he has been behind and supportive of the kind of vaccines that now have available, where they can inject in the vaccine, include in the vaccine, a tracer, a marker, so that when you get the vaccine, it's not just that it supposedly helps you, prevent you from getting some disease, but then they can trace you. They don't have to even draw blood. They don't even have to figure out what your medical history is through a chart. They can simply test you while you're standing there and say, yep, a little marker in your system is telling us you've had XYZ, but not these other 3 things. You're not up to date on your vaccines, or you are up to date. Putting vaccine markers in vaccines is the latest trendy thing, part of what Bill Gates pushes, and part of what he's extremely determined to push with respect to hydroxychloroquine is to push that, with respect to vaccines, which he would argue makes the hydroxychloroquine kind of unnecessary. Don't worry, we're going to have a vaccine. Let me ask Matt Wonderful to play this little clip by Bill Gates.
In my lifetime, this will be the greatest economic hit. But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice. People don't feel like going to the stadium when they might get infected. It's not the government who's saying, okay, just ignore this disease. And, people are deeply affected by seeing these deaths, by knowing they could be part of the transmission chain, and, old people, their parents, their grandparents could be affected by this. And so you don't get to say, ignore what's going on here. There will be the ability, particularly in rich countries, to open up if things are done well over the next few months. But for the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
Okay, folks, I have to tell you, that is a very alarming video, and that is Bill Gates on August 1st. This isn't something he said years ago. August 1st, and he's basically saying the world's going to stay shut down, and certainly he's talking to America, going to stay shut down until the vaccine's ready and everybody gets it, and that's the only way to return to normalcy. Bill Gates doesn't need to make any more money, that is clear, but he is intellectually, financially, emotionally, and professionally invested, deeply invested into vaccines as the only answer, and to pushing that for America to deal with our situation with COVID-19. So he doesn't get his way. You hear the language, the tone he uses, much as he has that kind of almost folksy accent, and he's gesturing with his hands. I think the hand gesture stuff, in his case, it looks a little bit like someone who's just exasperated with the stupidity of the American people. They should have to explain, why shouldn't that they should be happy. They should feel lucky because look, Bill Gates is giving us a vaccine. Can't we all just say, yay? This is the attitude I sense from him. The idea, I've got a solution here. Please shut up with other ideas such as hydroxychloroquine or the inhaled budesonide. That is a solution that Dr. Bartlett in Midland, Texas has come up with. He's been here in the show. He's joining us again in a couple of weeks in the show to talk about the great developments he's had dealing with COVID-19, finding recovery through the use of this inhaled steroid budesonide using a nebulizer. But back to what on this first 5 today, it is staggering, it is alarming, and there is no good explanation. I guess that's part of what the more the American people are coming around to recognizing. There's no good explanation for what we are watching our government do. There's no good explanation for the suppression of the massive supply of hydroxychloroquine parked somewhere in Washington, the federal government. There's no justification. for the continuing mockery and derision and kind of and dismissal of the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine by the federal government. There's no reason for it. There's no good reason, no legitimate reason, except to say it appears that a growing number of people, certainly Dr. Fauci, certainly Bill Gates, certainly a wide array of people around this world see the idea that the only way that they say the only way to get past COVID-19 is with massive vaccination. And when we recognize the vaccination process involves now these tracers and markers, so you're not really going to escape the government's ability to assess you, figure out what you've had, tell you what you need to get. This is it's a very alarming picture, and actually, especially in the age of Donald Trump, who is pretty much usually right with the American people, right with the idea of freedom, right with the idea of supporting a free people. It is very concerning that we're not seeing more speaking up on behalf of the Trump administration in the White House. Really a little bit alarming that we're not hearing Donald Trump saying, you know what? I mean, he's made comments here and there about hydroxychloroquine being, that he liked taking it. When he took it, he felt it kept him healthy, didn't have any side effects to him. So he's been, inching his way toward some statements that are friendly toward hydroxychloroquine, but he's also pretty much onto the vaccine bandwagon, onto the notion that we're going to have to kind of stay tamped down. And that is, on the very short list of things I feel concerned about President Donald Trump, that is on the list. I think now I've gotten notes from listeners, I think he's not quite attuned to how far Dr. Fauci led him down the primrose path, duped him into getting into the shutdowns, getting into the entire decimation of our economy. I'm not sure Donald Trump is yet quite clear on how much Fauci literally manipulated the situation and is still manipulating the situation. I would love to see President Trump just say, Dr. Fauci, there's no answer. You have no answer to the reality that countries that made hydroxychloroquine available early on over the counter and they had a far lower death rate from COVID, you haven't given me an answer that's good enough. This is what I'd love to hear Donald Trump say to Fauci and to the American people. I have not heard a good enough answer yet out of the medical community, out of Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, the whole NIH. I haven't heard a good enough explanation for why we have better results in countries that make hydroxychloroquine available and in terms of keeping death rates down, and worse results in countries like America, where we're trying to tamp it down, discourage, or ban its use. And so President Trump needs to say to Dr. Fauci and all the rest of them, you know what, we're going to go with what works in this case, and we need to make hydroxychloroquine more available to doctors around this country and stop talking it down. I'd love to see that out of the Trump administration. I do get emails from listeners all the time, emails and messages on Facebook saying, oh, I think Donald Trump is just leading Fauci along. He's just playing him. He's eventually going to come out and say this. I hope so. But folks, we're less than 100 days away from the election, and the availability of hydroxychloroquine, the prevalence of COVID-19, the prevalence of fear of COVID-19 is a massive factor in the November 2020 elections. And I want those 2020 elections to be not done by mail-in ballot, not done by the farce that the left is trying to create with the fear of COVID-19 and expanding the voting period and going with mail-in ballots. It's all tied together. It's all tied together. So I'd love to hear that Donald Trump is going to step up sometime soon and say, Dr. Fauci, we're not going to ignore data. We're not going to ignore science. We're not going to ignore reality. Countries allowing access to hydroxychloroquine have a better survival rate. Therefore, we're going to make it available in America. We're going to stop talking it down. And if you can't get on that program, you need to move along. That would be a seminal, fabulous Donald Trump moment in his presidency. And that, my friends, is the first five.